Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today to unpack FEOC rules and discuss what nonprofits need to know to protect ITC and direct pay. Hopefully, that song put everybody in the right mindset and frame of mind. Our presentation will begin now. To kick things off, we will open it up with a poll question, and then we'll dive right in. So this webinar is being recorded. We'll send the recording, slide deck, and Q&A transcript to all the registered attendees. We expect that to go out within a few days. Please add any questions you have for the chat into the chat section in your Zoom window, and we'll take care of those Q&A questions at the end. Any questions we don't get to in the live Q&A, we will address by providing answers in the Q&A transcript that goes out to everybody in the recap. Today's presenters include myself, Nicole Withrow, Director of Sales for Collective Sun, and my esteemed colleague, Lee Barkin, Chief Community Officer at Collective Sun. Just a quick disclaimer, the information presented today is for educational purposes only, and it should not be construed as tax or legal advice. You should always consult your tax advisor or legal professional for personalized guidance. Tax law is all about facts and circumstances. So while Lee is a CPA, he is not your CPA. He is not my CPA. And as he has pointed out in the past, every rule seems like it has an exception and exceptions to those exceptions. So if you're watching this today and you think, oh, it sounds like that might apply to me, you're probably right, but you might not be right because there might be an exception. And the point in all of this is to say you really want to engage with your own tax advisor or legal professional who can provide guidance tailored to the unique facts and circumstances of your project. The other thing to be aware of is things are always changing. So if you're watching this webinar in the web archive, please be aware that today's date is August 21st, 2025. And as with all things related to tax law and treasury guidance, you want to be sure you're referencing the most recent information available. Lee, do you want to add anything?
No, that was fantastic. Thank you, Nicole.
Awesome. Okay. Who is Collective Sun? So Collective Sun is a solar financing organization, and we help solve two basic problems for nonprofits going solar. How do you pay for it, and how do you get it built and built properly? We help solve these problems by financing solutions and with construction management, fund control, and other components to make sure that things get built properly. We've been doing this for a while, and because of that, we have a unique understanding of the financing challenges that nonprofits face and the tools to overcome them. And since about 2011, we have helped hundreds of nonprofits fund solar projects that free up their resources to better serve their communities. Lee's showing my brag-a-watt slide, so I will brag for a moment. We currently have projects in 24 states and counting, totaling over 31 megawatts of projects and more than $84 million in projects. All right, there's a lot to cover. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Lee and we can start diving in. Lee Barkin, take it away.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for that great opening and introduction. And thank you also to Rosanna, who is not just helping out with the tech today, but all the amazing content that I know folks have been enjoying in the articles. Thank you again to Rosanna for all that amazing support. So we are here today to talk about FEOC, and to talk about FEOC, we have to start at the beginning, which is the OB3, and we have a number of webinars and recordings on this, so you've probably heard all about it. And just as a quick recap, this is the reconciliation bill that was passed on July 4th of this year. When you get the slide deck and recording that Nicole mentioned earlier, I highly encourage you to come back here and click on these hyperlinks and just read the bill. Everyone complains about how long they are, and the reality is this is like 20 pages. And sections 7512 and 7513, you can handle this. Just go in, read it. It's not that complicated, and it'll answer a lot of questions. And the first thing after you read it, you'll go, oh, wow, there's a major sense of urgency to start my projects right away and safe harbor under these provisions. And the other things that sort of cliff notes you'll take away from reading it are that solar tax credits are going away. And here's how the rule landed. It is you must place your system in service by December 31, 2027, or you must begin construction on or before July 4th, 2026. And if you get that begin construction, then you have 4 years, maybe more than 4 years. We have other videos that talk about beginning of construction and how that all works. Um, but those are kind of your two pathways to preserve the ITC. You miss those, you miss the ITC, and you're out of luck. The other thing that's new in OB3 is the foreign entities of concern. That's today's topic, the FEOC, or what we call the ITC disqualification gauntlet. It is like a challenging race that you have to go through and demonstrate that you don't get disqualified. And if you make it to the other side, you still get your ITC. This language also had a safe harbor that was based on beginning of construction on or before 12/31/25. So getting your project started, beginning construction this year is going to exempt you from everything that you're going to hear about today with FIAC. No, well, the portions related to the supply chain are going to be exempted, and the material assistance rules are going to be exempted. The primary ones that you should be concerned about if you're on this call, you're a nonprofit, you're doing some distributed generation, rooftop, or in your parking lot, these are the things that you're going to care about. So I've bolded the begin construction. Those are kind of really key, important terms. And we have another video just about beginning construction. In fact, we'll do another webinar in a couple weeks just on beginning of construction because this is such a hot topic. But we're not going to focus on that today, other than to mention that there are 16 years worth of historical precedent and guidance, a great body of knowledge that we already have built around these two pathways of physical work test or the 5% safe harbor. And those are historically what we've understood to mean when someone says beginning of construction in the law. But what happened 3 days after the bill was passed was an executive order was issued that instructed Treasury to change some of these safe harbors. There were some folks who were not happy with the broad, with what they saw as the broad nature of some of these safe harbors. And so the executive order instructed Treasury to provide new guidance. And as I said before, this executive order was trumpet noise. And it was trumpet noise because you don't need an executive order for Treasury to, uh, in order for Treasury to issue, uh, any kind of guidance. Treasury can issue guidance anytime it wants. It can rescind guidance anytime it wants. And, there's no need for an executive order. Nevertheless, we did get this executive order, and there was a lot of ambiguity for a period of time about what's going to be in the executive order. So the executive order came out last week on Friday. So August 15th, the executive order, the Treasury guidance came out on August 15th. And I would encourage everyone to click this link and read the notice. Again, this one also is only 20-ish pages, and I found it to be really well written. I thought it to be helpful and instructive, which is what they're intended to be, and provided great information. So I'd encourage you to check it out. And if you don't have time, you can check out our video, which we published on August 18th, talking all about what was in the Treasury notice that came out on August 15th. But here's the Cliff Notes. So the notice was very restricted in scope. It was just for wind or solar projects that are trying to assess this beginning of construction definition for the on or before July 4th. That's it. Physical work remained in place, very minor changes there. The safe harbor, the 5% safe harbor changed. It is now only available for projects at or below 1.5 megawatts. Solar projects, I should mention. Wind projects completely unavailable for the 5% safe harbor. And the continuous construction requirements functionally stay the same. So there were no changes there to get that 4 year, if you meet the safe harbor requirements to complete your project. The safe harbor, she also mentioned here this Treasury guidance didn't talk about foreign entities of concern. In fact, it only mentioned it once, and it was in this little footnote, and all the footnote said was this doesn't apply to FEOC. So all the guidance that came out on Friday is really only for wind and solar meeting the ITC safe harbor, nothing to do with FEOC, and they just said more guidance is coming. In fact, if you go back to the law and the bill that passed, it had a provision in the FEOC section that told us what beginning of construction is and referenced the historical body of 16 years worth of precedent and said that's what we mean when we say beginning of construction. So you already see here what's happened is a bit of a fork in the road. We now have two different definitions of beginning of construction. One of them that applies to solar and wind projects with respect to the July 4th deadline, and the other that has to do with FEOC. So there's now two different definitions inside, one set of rules, and that's something to kind of pay attention to. So if you're a nonprofit, you're watching, um, and you're trying to figure out how do I navigate this? How do I tackle it? You really should be thinking in terms of two different safe harbors. Um, how do I safe harbor for ITC and how do I safe harbor for FEOC? They both have beginning of construction language and they just have different dates. So there's a bit of a twofer here because if you can begin your construction by the end of 2025, you're going to get both a safe harbor from FEOC compliance and a safe harbor for ITC to give you another 4 years, the end of the fourth year, which you begin construction, and possibly even more if there's extenuating circumstances, which are all defined inside of the Treasury guidance that came out on August 15th. All right, so
Lee, before you go on, sorry to break in, but some of us have been noticing there's a gray box at the upper right of the slides. I don't know if you're seeing that, but if there's any way you can readjust.
a gray box at the upper right hand of the
Yeah,
slides.
it's kind of covering the upper right corner of the slides. I don't know what's going on. Sorry, everyone.
Oh, no, that's okay. Do you still see that gray box?
That looks
It's,
better. Thank you.
yeah.
That's better. Okay. I don't want to cover up any slide text, uh, but we'll definitely share the slides at the end of the webinar as well, so everybody has those handy. So let's hop into FEOC and foreign entities of concern.
All
When,
right.
yeah, the good stuff. So
Yes.
when the reconciliation bill is being contemplated, a lot of folks thought that what was going to happen was we're going to double down on domestic content and pro-America, buy America, materials, and that ended up not being what happened. It ended up instead being a kind of list of things that you can't use as opposed to things that we want to encourage you to use. So the framing was all around sort of, I'm paraphrasing, but these national security threats, foreign adversaries and foreign terrorist organizations, and it really functionally boiled down to four covered nations: China, Iran, Russia, and North Korea. Now, I don't know about you, but we don't get a whole lot of solar panels from North Korea, Iran, or Russia these days. So, functionally speaking, this is less of a buy American materials bill. It's more of a functionally anti-China bill, and that's just how it kind of materialized in the language and in the rule set that ultimately promulgated. So uh, the other thing to keep in mind about FEOC is it's not as much about geography. Like domestic content is all about where is it built, built in the US or not. But FEOC is really about who owns and controls the entity that is making the products and the entity that is claiming the tax credit. So it's all about sort of ownership and control. So here's a quick pop quiz. Nicole, I don't know if you want to join me on this, but let's say you have a solar manufacturer. We've seen a lot of these pop up, located in the US. Let's say they're using a lot of US components, but they're owned by a Chinese company. Nicole, what do you think? Is that going to meet the FEOC requirements, compliance requirements, or not meet FEOC compliance requirements?
If I had to guess, I would say it depends. I don't think we know enough based on that little bit of information.
Why is it depends always the right answer?
I know. I've had a great teacher, so
So you are correct. It does depend. And the facts and circumstances on all of these are constantly evolving. And this ended up being a real world situation. Exactly a month ago today, JA Solar, a Chinese owned company who set up shop in the US, they realized, oh, come January 1st, 2026, every panel rolling off this assembly line is going to be deemed as coming from a prohibited foreign entity and potentially trigger, the loss of ITC. So what do? They sold to Corning. Now Corning owns the factory, and so we're seeing the market kind of evolve in real time to adapt to these rules that are coming out and that are changing. There's really kind of two frames everyone should be thinking through with FEOC, two kind of tests, if you will. One of them is who's claiming the ITC, the taxpayer identity. Now, you're a nonprofit. You're still a taxpayer in this context because you're claiming direct pay. So the question is, are you a prohibited foreign entity? And that's a new term, prohibited foreign entity. You're going to start hearing a lot. And it really boils down to ownership and control. We'll dive into that further in some further slides. But the other kind of area of FEOC is the supply chain sourcing. And that's more of a question about, is the entity that makes my equipment, are they a prohibited foreign entity? And there is a new term, a new calculation you're going to get to perform called the material assistance cost ratio. In order to determine, is there too much content made by a prohibited foreign entity that's going to deem my project ineligible for an ITC. So the first question I'm sure you already have is, what is a prohibited foreign entity? Well, isn't that nice? They gave us the definition and it sounds so simple. A prohibited foreign entity is a specified foreign entity or a foreign influence entity. Okay, thanks. That's now crystal clear. We have this new equation we're all going to have to learn, which is a prohibited foreign entity is a specified foreign entity, which we'll talk about in a minute, also incorporates a foreign controlled entity or a foreign influence entity. Oh my gosh, my head is already hurting and I'm only like on page one. How do you wrap your head around this? Uh, so let's dig a little deeper. A specified foreign entity in the law is four different things. There are all of these other laws that it referenced, which we'll talk about in a second, or they nicely threw in a fifth and just said a foreign controlled entity. So if you're a foreign controlled entity, you're automatically a specified foreign entity, which makes you automatically a prohibited foreign entity. So this reminds me a little bit, Nicole, have you ever seen those stacking dolls that like one fits inside the
Yes.
other and the other fits in the other? Like that's kind of what's going on here. But let's kind of convert this into English. Those four things that I mentioned are laws that create prescriptive lists. So they don't bake in the list in the law. What they say is they direct, agencies of the U.S. government to maintain these lists that are considered national security threats. So the first one on that list of four, that's where we get the definition of covered nations. So this can change, countries can come on and off lists, but that's where the China, Iran, Russia, North Korea comes from. It's from that first, you know, little bullet point in here for this particular law. The next one is a list of Chinese military companies. The next one is the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. You may be familiar with this because there have been detentions of modules and tariffs put in place. This is something kind of outside the scope that's been, on our radar for a long time with respect to forced labor in the Xinjiang region in China. And panels coming out of that region have been tagged for other purposes, but they got put in here as well. That if you're also part of that list, then you're also automatically a specified foreign entity, which automatically makes you a prohibited foreign entity. And then the other was this list of Chinese battery companies, which was interesting. But the takeaway here is the specified foreign entity specified, it's a list, it's a prescriptive list. Or you're a foreign controlled entity. Now, foreign controlled entity, they give us this other kind of, wonky definition that again includes a government of a covered nation, an agency or instrumentality of that covered nation. There's this entity, person who is a U.S. citizen or national of a covered nation, but is not a dual citizen. So I'll get into that in a minute, but you sort of see this pattern here. Like these are uh, non-prescriptive. Let's put this in English. We'll go straight to the English slide. So we still have this government of a covered nation, agency, instrumentality, but then they throw in this like you're a citizen of a covered nation. Now, again, if you hold dual citizenship with the U.S. or you have a green card, you're off this list. But if you're just a citizen of one of those four countries, you're a foreign controlled entity. Like that's kind of interesting for reasons we'll talk about in a minute. Uh, and then also, if you're incorporated or your principal place of business is in one of those covered nations, then you're a foreign controlled entity, which makes you a specified foreign entity, which makes you a prohibited foreign entity. Like these are all getting rolled up with some pretty broader, like non-prescriptive definitions. Now, this is not like a list like the first ones were. This is kind of a broader, scope. And then they threw in number 5, which is an entity controlled by one of the above. So if it's an entity controlled by a government or instrumentality or agency, or an entity controlled by a citizen of a covered nation, or an entity that's incorporated in or principal place of business in a covered nation. Like this is kind of getting, into a pretty broad kind of complex web. Um, Thankfully, they do at least define what do you mean by determination of control. Now, that's more typically applied as 50% of ownership. This one caught my attention with, or 50% of beneficial interests, which we'll talk about in a minute, because nonprofits, of course, don't have owners, but they could still get, kind of caught up in these rules. So then the last definition, going back to our handy dandy equation here, prohibited foreign entity is a specified foreign entity, or a foreign controlled entity, or a foreign influence entity. Now, foreign influence entity, let's just go straight to the English version here. You're an FIE if a specified foreign entity, one of those ones we talked about before, if they can appoint a covered officer, like appoint CEO or appoint a board member, if something about them, getting back to like this definition of control, how does a foreign entity control an entity? Well, if they can appoint the CEO, they have control. If any one, SFE owns 25% of the equity, they're saying, hey, you have control, or a group. So let's say a single Chinese company owns 25%, they're an FIE. Or if there's, 4 different Chinese companies or individuals who each own 10%, as a group, they're now 40%. That's now, going to be deemed an FIE. And then the last one, also kind of curious, is on the debt side, it says 15% of the debt issued to one or more SFE. So a lot of little kind of, I won't say traps, but kind of provisions here where you could get entangled into this definition quite easily. So let's take a breath here. Again, a lot of new acronyms, a lot of new language. Prohibited foreign entity is the cover, the top level catch-all term. And that's going to basically be a specified foreign entity or a foreign controlled entity, which I'll roll into that definition, or a foreign influenced entity. Clear as mud, right, Nicole?
Yes, exactly. Well said.
Um, so let's back up a couple steps. I started this off by saying there's really 2 tests. The taxpayer identity. So are you a prohibited foreign entity from an ownership and control perspective? If you're a nonprofit, you probably don't have to worry about this. You're probably not on any terrorist watch lists. When you go to claim your ITC, you're probably going to sail through the taxpayer identity test. That's not going to be an issue. The one that we need to focus on with the remainder of our time is really, who is making my equipment, and are they a prohibited foreign entity? See how that's a little different than like what country is it made in, the geography? It's really about who owns and controls the entity that's making the equipment. And we're going to get introduced to this new concept called the material assistance cost ratio. So for the first one, I mentioned you're probably okay. You probably don't have an issue being designated as a prohibited foreign entity, but there's a couple of edge cases I just want to throw out there. I'm not super sure about these. I think we still need guidance, and probably these will be clarified over time. But you're a nonprofit; you don't have owners, so by definition, you can't be owned by a specified foreign entity or a foreign national. Like you can't be owned, but can they control you? And I think that's kind of an interesting question that needs to be parsed further when you're doing this facts and circumstances test, because if you have board members, there's no law that says only U.S. citizens can be board members of a nonprofit. So if you look at who's on your board, do you have board members who are citizens or nationals of a covered nation? And also assuming they're not, if they have dual citizenship or they're green cards, that don't worry about it. But if they don't have those things and they're just a citizen of a covered nation, um, there's a question here. Like, well, how are your bylaws written? Do they say 50% or more make decisions and can elect a board member and have control? So then you go down to this, it's also the entity level. If that entity has potentially 50% or more of these persons who are non-citizens, or I should more specifically say, who are citizens of a covered nation. Very big distinction. So this came up, like take a Russian Orthodox Church. If your board is comprised entirely or enough according to your bylaws to be able to make a claim of control. I think there's an open question here. It's not certain. I'm not saying for sure that this is problematic. I'm saying this is what you should explore with your tax professionals. And then the last one that kind of caught my attention was this issue of debt. So what about schools and what about governments that issue bonds? There's been a little bit of conversation about this in tax circles, and everybody is pointing back to this 15% of who it's been issued to, which is different than who owns it. So bonds, are traded, and keeping track of who at this moment in time, applying that 15% rule, would be maybe burdensome. So for whatever reason, they wrote it's who you issued it to. And then there's questions about whether or not we're talking about who the underwriter was, if they were a specified foreign entity or not. So I think this is probably okay. But if you're a school or government entity, just double check this and run this through your tax counsel and make sure you're going to pass that facts and circumstances test. All right, so that's the first half of the taxpayer. Is the taxpayer a prohibited foreign entity? Because a prohibited foreign entity cannot claim an ITC and vis-a-vis direct pay, because direct pay just sits on top of the ITC. Then we shift gears into this material assistance and this new definition of the material assistance cost ratio. And they give us this lovely, complicated definition of the total direct cost to the taxpayer attributable to all manufactured products, including components, which are incorporated into the qualified facility or energy storage technology upon completion of construction, minus, blah, 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 blah. Wake up. I think our audience just completely fell asleep. So in English, like the material assistance cost ratio, it's just this ratio of the cost of the stuff that's green light over the total cost. So the bigger this number is, the better. If the majority of your equipment is manufactured in a non-covered nation, or sorry, again, even I'm getting tripped up and confused, not where it's made, but by a company that is controlled by a covered nation, that cost is going to go in the numerator of the non-PFE, all the green light stuff. Everybody else, not the covered nations, all the entities manufacturing the manufactured products in countries other than China and the ones listed there, that's on the top. And then the total cost of manufactured products, again, going back to this definition, is going to be on the bottom. So it's a ratio. And the bigger the ratio, kind of the better through the view, of this particular law. And then they give us these threshold percentages. And the threshold percentages are different for qualified facilities and batteries. And you'll notice there's this huge kind of jump here. So in 2026, starting next year, in order to, sort of pass this material assistance cost ratio test, you're going to have to demonstrate that 40% is the green light stuff. And 55% of the batteries is the green light stuff, functionally not coming from China. And that's going to be complicated. Um,
How complicated do you think it'll be?
well,
Do you think it's possible?
I think we're getting that question a lot
Yeah.
lately. Like, how practical is it to meet that threshold? And I think it's a big unknown. I think the energy storage technology, the battery is going to be hard, really hard. And that number just goes up over time. Um, the 40%, the real challenge right now is that we don't have enough definition and guidance around how you calculate and how far back in that supply chain you have to look. So, in practical terms, there's a pathway, but getting the certifications, we're just not there yet as an industry. And we're all going to have to wait for more guidance that's going to come sometime, hopefully soon. And you get to enjoy another webinar like the one you're enjoying today about how those rules shake out. But the kind of conversations happening in tax circles right now, just to give you a lens on that universe, there's kind of three different camps that people are coming into or falling into about what this means. How far back in the supply chain do you have to go? Are you just looking at the applicable project component? So, like just the module. If the module is non-FEOC, if the module is manufactured by an entity that is not a prohibited foreign entity, is that good enough? Or are 40% of that cost across all those components, is that going to be good enough to meet this? Or the second camp in B here, no, you got to look further. You got to look further into the components of that module. So it's not just about who controls or owns the entity assembling the module, but who controls the or owns the entities that feed materials like the cell and the EVA and the backsheet and the glass and the rails and like all of those things into the module. You got to go like that far back. And
It
there's a
sounds familiar.
it doesn't that sound familiar?
It does sound
There's like
familiar.
another webinar you can watch about domestic content. It should sound familiar. And then the third is you got to go all the way back up the supply chain down to the polysilicon, which not just, it's going to be very hard to demonstrate that you're free of prohibited foreign entities all the way up to the polysilicon, but just administratively speaking, that just seems like it would make it functionally unworkable. Like I don't know how you would get all those documents and demonstrate and go all the way back. So that is potentially concerning if the rules come out in that direction. Now this is a good place to kind of say maybe back to our disclaimer. Um, there are unknowns right now. We're in this period of ambiguity where we need more guidance to tell us, with some more specificity. Uh, and we're going to deviate from our normal practices a little bit here, which is to say that it would be very unsatisfying to just tell everybody like, okay, we'll just go wait for the guidance. Because in the real world, I know all of you are contemplating projects. And you're trying to figure out like, how am I going to make all this work? And you can't, practically speaking, just wait until new guidance comes out. You have to make some decisions now. So what we're going to do is we're going to share with you, this is what we think it's going to look like, with the caveat that we could be wrong. And it just seems like we're doing more harm by being silent at this point than by sharing our perspective on how we're viewing this, with again that caveat that the final rules may not end up exactly like what we're describing, but this is kind of what we're working with at the minute. So yeah, we're landing on number two here. We're squarely on this manufactured product component um, sort of layer, and I want to use a little bit of time here to explain with a little more detail about how exactly that's going to work. I did mention that there's more guidance coming, and the law literally says, it directs the secretary to provide new some safe harbor tables by December 31, 2026. And of course, that's just too late. That's not good enough. But thankfully, they did say in the interim, until Treasury provides that guidance, you can go ahead and use Notice 2025-08 uh, and rely on a certification by a supplier. And that certification, what we're thinking is going to look an awful lot like what the reliance documents and disclosure documents look like for domestic content and the safe harbor tables in Notice 2025-08. So that's where I'd kind of go to hang my hat at the moment, is to look back to these schedules, and instead of trying to add up enough points in order to qualify for domestic content, what you're doing is slightly different. It's basically looking at each of the manufactured product components, the cells, the frame, glass, and so on, and just getting an attestation or some kind of disclosure document that indicates that the material, this subcomponent, this component, the cell itself, the frame or back rail, is or is not uh, from a prohibited foreign entity. And so we have not yet seen how the supplier marketplace will react to this. Uh, I've actually seen my first FEOC disclosure document, and it was garbage. It did not meet the qualifications or thresholds that are laid out in the law, but it took an attempt. It took a noble, stab at trying to like provide information, but it's going to take some rework. Industry is going to have to get up to speed. I hope by the time we do some future webinars, I'll be able to show you, like, here's how these are, being done by industry. But at the moment, they don't exist. And so the way that you're going to have to get satisfied is to add up enough of these numbers so that if the cell is not labeled a prohibited foreign entity, so take the cell and take, the frame, and those two together are going to put you over 40%. And that is the sort of threshold for the MACR that we need to meet for 2026. Um, it seems like a lot of work. It is like it's going to be fairly complex, but it'll get better over time. I think over time you're going to see kind of, these disclosure documents a little bit more forthcoming. You're going to basically, develop, sort of no-fly lists for equipment, and I think things are going to work out in the long run. It's just getting there is going to be exceptionally difficult, and we still have all the unknowns about, some of those guidance questions I was talking about. Now, here's where I might be wrong, and I already know we're going to get some fan mail, and they're going to send me this snippet, and it says, well, it says the certification has to include this provision that the supplier does not know or have reason to know that any prior supplier in the chain of production of that property is a prohibited foreign entity. That's true. And what I'm going to do is hang my hat on this word "or" over here and say, yeah, I don't think we're going to get this. I think that's going to be exceptionally difficult. The path that is illuminated using the safe harbor tables in 2025-08 plus a certification that references, this clause that will indicate essentially what I was describing earlier, that the individual, you know, manufactured products were not produced or manufactured by a prohibited foreign entity. So I think we're going to end up back to these sorts of tables where people are going to just disclose this is not, this is not, this is not, and we're just going to have to add up the points and make sure it's going to meet whatever the threshold percentage is for that particular year. Woo, that's a lot of stuff.
No, this is where
Um,
you stretch your legs in a long,
yeah, that's right.
long-
Like everybody stand up and stretch. Take a moment. Bring it all full circle. There's two safe harbors. If you're a nonprofit, you want to do a solar project, there's two things to keep your eye on. Safe harboring for ITC, making sure that the beginning of construction rules are met before July 4th of 2026. And all that fun stuff I just talked about with FEOC, if you want to avoid all of that completely, please try to safe harbor your project by beginning construction before 12/30, on or before 12/31/2025, So you have a window right now to get a toehold in a universe that does not need that FEOC compliance just for the material assistance rules. The other ones, there's a bunch of other rules that are still going to apply, but those material assistance rules are really what you need to keep your eye on, because I think that's where a lot of the concerns are going to end up being. Um, and you can sidestep all of that by beginning construction. And now that we have the Treasury notice from August 15th, we have clarity on how to reach beginning of construction. If you still have questions, we have more videos on our website about that definition of beginning of construction. If you want to take an entire hour just talking about beginning of construction, what do you think, Nicole? Let's do that. We
Yes, I'm all for that. That sounds much easier.
we will share at the end of this webinar some information, a link to our next webinar where we will do just that and do another deeper dive on those beginning of construction rules. But at the end of the day, if you remember one thing from any of these acronyms and new rules, it's really this: start now. Like, the best thing you can do is begin construction, qualify under the beginning of construction rules, and safe harbor for ITC and for the FEOC exemption by getting your project started now. And
Well
with that,
said.
Nicole, I'll pass the baton to you.
All right, we can talk about solutions. So earlier I mentioned that we have solutions that solve two of the major challenges nonprofits face when they're going solar. And the first one being, how do you pay for it? The second one being, how do you get it built and built properly? So we do this with our solar loan and our solar power agreement, or SPA. That SPA is a subscription or third-party ownership model, by the way. If you want to own your solar system, the Collective Sun Solar Loan may be the path for you. The loan features a payment holiday during construction. There are no payments until the system's installed. There's no collateral beyond the solar equipment itself, no personal guarantee required, no prepayment penalties. A variety of risk mitigating best practice requirements are included to protect our nonprofit partners. And we also provide some project management support with the loan, as well as installer vetting. And this loan also includes our direct pay tax filing service and post-installation performance verification. Say that 3 times fast, Lee Barkin.
Wow.
If your nonprofit is more aligned culturally, like your internal culture leans toward maybe not owning the solar equipment, you're more in tune with an SPA or a subscription model, where our third party ownership structure, where Collective Sun designs a solar system, chooses a vetted qualified installer, manages the construction of the solar system, owns the solar equipment, monitors the system's performance, is responsible for operations and maintenance, and provides performance guarantee. Then a subscription model like the SPA, that could be the right path for your organization. By the way, in this scenario, Collective Sun Foundation, our nonprofit, owns the equipment and you own the energy generated by the solar system. And I think the biggest kind of question that you face early on is really, how do you decide which is the right path? Deciding which option you want to pursue, loan or SPA subscription, is really where you have to start. And it's a question that really, again, it comes back to what's our internal culture? Do we want to own? Do we prefer leasing structures, or something that looks like a lease, which is how you might relate to that subscription model? It's important to have this conversation with your green team early on, so you know which option you want to pursue. If you're not sure how to start that conversation, you could ask yourself questions like, do we have in-house construction management expertise? How comfortable are we bearing construction risk? Are we comfortable bearing long-term ownership risks? How do we feel about navigating beginning construction rules, safe harbor rules, FEOC rules on our own? And again, there's no right or wrong answer here. It's all about figuring out what makes sense for your organization and the resources that are available to you. A few bonus thoughts here for either path. With both of these solutions, the loan and the SPA subscription model, your organization owns the energy generated by the solar system. Both also require you to insure the solar system. And if you're considering a rooftop installation under either of these models, you do want to make sure your roof is in good condition and ready to receive a solar system. I think with that, we do have some additional resources that we can share with everyone who is joining us today. We invite you to check out our website at collectivesun.com. There are lots of great resources, whether you are a solar champion and you're just really hungry for information. There are a lot of great videos, a lot of great articles. You can read articles telling the story from the perspective of other nonprofits who've gone solar, which I know a lot of folks find super valuable. Also, if you want to reach out to us, by the way, after this webinar, of course, not during it, you can do that at collectivesun.com through our contact us page. Lee Barkin, I don't know if we can do a drum roll, but it's time for my favorite part of any webinar, which is the Q&A. So it doesn't look like we had a ton of questions the last time I was peeking at those. No, I wasn't peeking at the Q&A questions while you were talking about FEOC rules. Here's a great question, actually. I'm going to jump right in with a question about, am I correct that in the recent Treasury guidance, begin construction for projects under 1.5 megawatts AC is still the 5% rule? Lee Barkin?
Am I correct that it's still the 5% rule?
Yes. Yes. In other words, that 5% rule didn't change if a project is under 1.5 up to 1.5 megawatts AC.
So correct. So that is the big takeaway that the Treasury guidance from August 15th said if you're, under at or under 1.5 megawatts, you can use the physical work test if you want, or you could still continue to use the 5% safe harbor. The challenge for projects over 1.5 megawatts is that physical work test is now the only pathway for them. That's the only option. And wind projects, by the way, only physical work test. Wind projects, even under small wind, under 1.5 megawatt, cannot use that. And by the way, that's effective September 2nd. So one of the other sort of bonuses of that guidance, some folks were thinking that the guidance would be retroactive and apply retroactively. No, it wasn't even like as of today, the day the guidance comes out, which is often the case. The guidance said you still have a couple weeks here. Like if you can wrap up, if you're relying on that 5% safe harbor and you're above 1.5 megawatts, you technically have until September 2nd. So that's also something to keep in mind. For folks on this call, if you're doing a rooftop project on your church or your school or your YMCA, Boys and Girls Clubs, look, you're going to be under 1.5 megawatts, and you're going to be able to continue to use the 5% safe harbor rule. So the Treasury guidance in many respects was kind of mild, kind of trivial. They changed a little bit of the tweaking of the language, but functionally, no changes, no major changes that you have to be concerned with. So you still have to go through the detail of what does it mean to begin construction, pay or incur 5%, and make sure you're doing more than 5% in case the cost of the project ultimately increases, because it's 5% of the final project cost, the tax eligible basis of the project, not 5% of what you thought it would be when you started. So if you have cost escalations, change orders sometimes happen, you don't want to blow your 5% exemption by having exactly 5%. But to answer that person's question, you're good. If you're at or under 1.5 megawatts, you can rely on the 5% safe harbor, just like you would before the Treasury guidance, just like you would before the EO came out.
All right, we're going to talk about, well, I'm going to ask you a question in regard to the 15% debt rule. So for school districts and munis going after direct pay, will they have to show who their bond holders are or just their underwriters to prove they are not foreign influenced entities with respect to the 15% debt rule?
Yeah, so my current view on this is that it's not who currently owns it. It's who was the initial sort of owner. And I think you have to parse that with your counsel to understand, is that the underwriter we worked with, or is that the first person who purchased it from the underwriter? But I think it is a moment in time, the way that language is written, is that who it was issued to, not who currently owns it.
Okay.
And if I can go
Sure.
back while you're, one other comment I wanted to make about that 1.5 megawatt, be aware that there's special aggregation rules that are a little different. The guidance did come out with some very specific rules about what gets functionally integrated into the 1.5 megawatt. So if you're trying to play games about, well, I'm splitting off this array and splitting off that array, and really I have two 1.4 megawatt arrays to qualify under this, like, that's probably not going to work. So you want to circle back and look at the definition in the guidance on the August 15th guidance, because it is a little different than the historical guidance, which applies to, the functional interdependence tests are different, uh, different kettle of fish. The rules in the August 15th apply specifically to the 1.5 megawatt threshold. So just be aware, if we've already run across our first project that's going to have to address this issue. Uh, the 1.5 megawatt, uh, has some rules around what is incorporated and what is not.
Got it. I'm going to read this one exactly as it's written because I think it's going to give you some great opportunities to kind of hone in on some specifics here. Assuming the company does not have connection to China, Korea, Indonesia, the Philippines, etc., would they be a foreign controlled entity?
Okay, so I want to go back first of all and clearly delineate and define a covered nation, because Philippines is not on that list. So we are talking about North Korea, Iran, Russia, and China. That's it. As far as whether or not it is controlled or owned, you have to go back through those tests and identify if it triggers any one of those provisions that could move it into the category of being considered a foreign influence entity or a specified foreign entity and ultimately a prohibited foreign entity. That's going to be an extremely facts and circumstances based test. And I assume you're talking about the material assistance rules, like where who is uh, the entity that is manufacturing the equipment. Uh, and that there will have to be like an analysis that you perform to make sure that at least in 2026, if you begin construction on January 1st, 2026 or later, that you are meeting that threshold percentage of at least 40% is non-prohibited foreign entity, the green light equipment. Um, but the best way to make sure you meet that test is to safe harbor from it completely and
Yes.
begin construction by 12/31/2025. And then under those circumstances, uh, that requirement would not apply to you.
Perfect. All right. How can a nonprofit understand if their developer will be able to comply with FEOC? Is there due diligence that can be performed to ensure they will comply?
That's such a great question, and thank you to the person who asked it. This is where all of us and our nonprofit roles need to lean in, and look, lean forward, and not rely on our developer or our contractor or our counterparty, because at the end of the day, that ITC, if you are going to claim direct pay, you are signing under penalty of perjury the compliance. So they can say all day long, oh, we're fine, we're fine, we're fine. But you are ultimately signing that attestation, and you have to be comfortable that it's being met. And that's going to play out in a series of legal provisions. Different people are going to handle it differently. But you can't just like hope it's okay and take the word of a third party that, well, I got this box and it had a US flag on it, so it's probably fine. Like, that's just not going to work. There's a parallel here with the universe we find ourselves in for domestic content. We see a lot of projects where a party, a developer or EPC will claim, oh, it's domestic content, you're fine. And then we dig into it and we find out you're not fine. And so there's a series of tests and things that you're going to have to do. And that ultimately is a burden that's going to be borne by the taxpayer, whoever's claiming that ITC, which is another interesting segue. If you don't want to be that party, you don't have to. You can have a third party owned structure, like Nicole mentioned, the subscription model. With a subscription model, that's another way. None of these headaches are yours. You're not claiming the ITC. Our nonprofit is claiming the ITC. So we'll go ahead and do that work for you on your behalf, and then, sort of pass through those savings to you in the form of a lower subscription. So a lot of folks are finding that attractive, if for no other reason than it's just not their headache, and they're looking for more of an easy button approach.
Excellent. This next question I think is a great question to share with everybody. Sorry, I just checked the time real quick to make sure we're still okay. Um, why should I be concerned about who is making the equipment if the supplier is here in the US? They should be concerned and comply, correct?
So that's another great
It,
question
it
that
is.
dovetails my last point, which is it's not the supplier making the attestation. You are the taxpayer, whoever that is, whether it's us as Collective Sun or you as the owner of the system claiming direct pay. So the supplier can say whatever they want, but they're ultimately not on the hook for the consequences. And that's why it's important in the work we're doing to get those disclosure documents and reliance documents, and making sure that they're meeting those criteria, whether it's for domestic content to claim a bonus adder, or whether it's for FEOC compliance, which is going to be on all of our radars in 2026. Like, at the end of the day, it remains to be seen how this shakes out in the marketplace. But I can tell you, with domestic content, it's been a challenge to get disclosure documents and reliance documents from that community, because manufacturers also don't want to be held liable and responsible. So I'm hoping that changes, and I'm hoping that over time these will become more of the norm. But at the moment, it's we're just not at that place yet where it's well absorbed and well understood by the marketplace. So you are absolutely on the right track by asking your supplier and asking your solar installer, asking your developer, like, can you show me the FEOC disclosure documents? Can you provide? And I would go ahead and reference the 2025-08 safe harbor tables, and use those, and say, show me the information, and provide a disclosure document, because as a taxpayer, you want to be able to rely upon those when you're making those assertions, to be in compliance with the law.
I'm going to do one more question, Lee, and hopefully we can squeeze it in and then we'll wrap up. But is FEOC applicable to all projects, no matter the size of the system? And does foreign content matter if under 1 megawatt?
So one, yes, FEOC applies to everything. That, if you want to claim an ITC, if you don't want to claim an ITC, then I suppose that's another way to avoid it, but that's not attractive. And then the size of the system, there isn't really applicability. That's not really a feature or metric. It is more kind of binary, that thou shalt not claim an ITC if you are, if you fall under these prohibited foreign entity restrictions, and in one of these rules that deems this as a prohibited foreign entity. So uh, yeah, unfortunately, there isn't like an exception for small projects like we see in other parts of the law.
Perfect. All right. On that note, we are going to do another webinar on September 4th, same time, same place, where we'll delve into the latest beginning of construction rules. I think that based on the conversations I've been having, Lee, this should be a great addition to kind of our web archive. I think a lot of people are super interested in talking about beginning of construction rules. You'll have the link here. It'll be in the, is it in the, I think it's in the chat, apologies. And it'll also be in the slide deck that comes out with the recap. So as we wrap up today's presentation, invite folks to grab that out of the chat, the link to sign up to register for the webinar, and then just know it will come in the webinar recap email for all registered attendees. We do thank you all for joining us today. And if you missed the call to action, it's start now.